We have some time for questions for our speakers. Scott.
I keep asking questions, but it's all so interesting. Mark, so I wanted to ask you a couple of different things. First of all, how important is the age of exposure in these farm studies? Because as a personal experience, I grew up in the Bay Area, and then I moved when I was about 5 to upstate New York, which is surrounded by farms, and I had horrible bronchial spasms and allergies, just really bad, and for years. So that's my first question. Is age really important? Because your immune system develops when you're very young. And I don't know if they looked into, are these babies, are these toddlers who have this exposure? And secondly, as far as I think it's going to be unreasonable or unlikely we're going to get everyone to have a pig in their house or raw milk. I think they're awesome ideas. But there's other things that come in with these animals, right? Like parasites and influenza and stuff. But instead of doing that, what about an idea of figuring out, like they're starting to figure out who it is. There's this idea that in the gut microbiome, people have these ideas that you can have a pill that is called something like repopulate, where you actually have a bunch of bugs that are grown in the lab. They're not pathogenic. You could take the pill and reset your ecosystem when you have a real bad issue. What about the idea of, instead of having everyone have a pig, figuring out who is it, maybe even have a sterile cocktail, almost like a vaccine, and that you would actually bring that in and expose people and babies and toddlers to this early on to prepare their immune system like it's supposed to be. Anyway, those are my two issues.
Thank you. Two interesting and difficult questions. So from what I know of the literature on the farm effect, it's often done in birth cohorts where you're looking at possibly the maternal exposure, but certainly the exposure of the infant and outcomes later. And that's what most of the research is on. I don't know if people have tried to disentangle the critical periods of critical times of exposure. I think there's a sense in the literature that ongoing repeated exposure is important. And I've even seen some discussion of the fact that in adults, if you have that repeated exposure, you can get that kind of protection in adults, but not if the exposure is not continuous. So that's a really important question, and I don't think we know the answer, and I don't know what happened to you in upstate New York, but maybe you missed the protective window. As to the second question, remind me what the second question was?
Would you have a sort of cocktail
Oh, right. Okay.
of bugs if you do
Gotcha.
it work?
Okay. I think an important issue here is the issue of sustainability, and with fecal transplants, I think you're restoring a normal microbiome which somehow can sustain itself. All it needs is to be reintroduced, and then it sustains itself. My sense from the literature, which is not very big so far, is that farm environments sustain a farm-like environment in a house nearby because it's constantly being re-inoculated. And I suppose the challenge would be, first of all, to figure out what the pill, maybe it's more of a spray than a pill for the house, what that would contain, and secondly, how to keep it as an ongoing exposure. Because I doubt you could do that with a one-time exposure, or one-time inoculation.
Hi, Mark. Just to follow up on the question that was asked earlier. So maybe somebody heard your talk before you even delivered, and they came up with products. Last night, I received an email from my folks, and they sent me a link where somebody here in California has come up with a product called Home Biome and Better Air. So what they're claiming is that it's a cocktail of some $30 coming from soil that you can put on the surface for $30. And that you have to repeat this exercise every 3 months. So my question is, have they really looked into this? I mean, what's your take on that?
It sounds like they haven't looked into it very much, and I'm not sure what it means to have organisms from soil. Do you mean outdoor soil?
Yeah.
I-
They don't say any detail how those bugs were characterized and
Right.
how they, came up with that cocktail, but it's online, we can look.
Well, you can imagine there'll be many, many people running out to capitalize on this, and all of them now, I think, prematurely. I don't know how quickly they'll be running out to produce excrement-based inoculations for homes, but that might be more to the point. Although hay furniture still might work.
My concern is that this body should come up with some, position on things like that, because people are maybe listening to your talk or a similar talk, and they are quickly jumping to conclusion, and they say, okay, I can take, some bugs from farm or from soil or manure, and then, just try to create healthier microbiome.
So I'm sure that will happen. I'm not sure what can be done about that.
Hi, Mike, this is a question for you, and I didn't catch it at the end of the presentation. And I've seen chamber studies as well, actually some of which were performed at University of Colorado, and noted their popularity, seen them at airports, full walls of this stuff, much on the scale like you said. And at the end of the presentation, you said something about indoor climate where it might work, and you said cold, or I couldn't, can you repeat?
That was not for potted plants, that was for the
For the
bio
wall,
So
yeah.
yeah, I mean,
I didn't catch that, could you?
sure. My take is that, first, potted plants can't be at high enough densities to affect
Sure.
indoor air. The biowall, I think, has an active enough cleaning mechanism such that it could filter the indoor air appreciably. What I was talking about with the hot and cold climate was whether it was cost effective or not. So the purpose of a biowall is to be able to reduce your building ventilation air, because ventilating is expensive. And so it's easy to filter particles, it's difficult to filter gases. Particles are filtered mechanically, gases need some physicochemical element of filtration. And so if the idea of the biowall is to be able to reduce ventilation, we must ask ourselves, if we're going to put these in buildings, is first, is it cost effective to do so? And so conditioning ventilation air is, energy is not that expensive, in our part of the world. And if you do a cost-benefit analysis where you take the cost of operating a biowall and you compare it to the cost of ventilation energy that you can save by reducing ventilation rates, that allows you to determine if a biowall is cost-effective from an operational standpoint or not. And so when it's tempered outside, it makes a lot more sense to ventilate because it costs very little energy to condition that air. But if it's very cold outside, then it costs a lot more energy to condition that air. And so those are the types of environments where operationally a biowall could become cost effective if you compare those two things.
Because you're conditioning that
Because of
outdoor.
the conditioning.
You still have to push the air through the wall, or pull the air through the wall,
yeah.
one way or
You
another.
have to have active fans regardless, but yes, that's part of the equation.
But so it's the latent load issue in
Well,
warm climate, and then warming the air essentially in the cold, and that's where it fits in. Okay, now I
Well, you
get
just
it.
have to heat it, right? If you
Yes.
bring, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you can save that amount of heating in a cold climate
If you're
by
recirculating.
recirculating more and ventilating less.
Okay, I catch it now. Very
And
good.
Again, that conclusion did not at all consider the first cost of the biowall, which would really, I would think, I haven't done the exact calculation yet, but would just drive biowalls out of cost effectiveness probably in every case.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
I want to ask Michael a question. Do you know why it is that people use the biwalls? Is it for ventilation reduction, or is it just because they're nice looking?
I think they are sold by ventilation reduction sort of marketing, but I think people get them for many different reasons. So I think one reason why we have one at Drexel is because it was a new science building that was being built, and I think the people that were designing the building and the people that were working with the designers of the building thought that it would be an attractive centerpiece for the building and an effective marketing piece for the campus, which it very strongly has been that.
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
It is pretty. And so, plants have other impacts indoors besides just air cleaning, right? And so another thing people should look at, I think, is if plants lead to enhanced productivity or well-being effects in buildings from some psychological effect. I mean, these things are very real and can have very real impacts on productivity and wellness and stuff. I'm a big believer just in pure ventilation, though, by the way.
So for Mark, you mentioned specifically pigs and cows, but in a lot of cities, there's a growing movement to have chickens. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about potential, or is there any data on potential beneficial effects of urban chicken rearing?
It's a nice idea. I don't know anything about that. The one relevant anecdote I can tell you is that Thomas Platzmills, who's very knowledgeable about asthma, once said to me that he thought that 4 dogs was equal to 1 cow, that it was just sort of the mass of the animal or what it produces that was kind of the indicator of its potency. So if that were the case across all animals, you'd need a lot of chickens, but they could be helpful.
A question for Mark. So when I think of cow and pig fecal matter, I think of anaerobic digestion, and I think of archaebacteria. And a lot of the associations that microbial ecologists have made, especially using next-generation DNA sequencing, seem to focus just on bacteria and exclude that other domain of life that plays a large role in gut microbiota. Have you seen anything in your travels through the literature that suggests that people are paying attention to methanogens and other archaebacteria?
I'm probably not the right person to ask, but if the Finnish and European studies were done using next-generation sequencing, would they have all that as part of their findings? Really?
Well, there's primers for them.
There are, but people don't go back and repeat the study with those primers.
Well, you could ask Juha Pekkanen what he's thinking about this and find out.
I just wanted to add a little bit more information about the specific organisms that our colleagues from Finland and also Erica von Mutius and Chris Johnson and in her birth cohort dog studies are finding are the organisms not only linked to protection against allergy and asthma, but also in their animal models are popping up. And the only point I wanted to make is that these don't seem to be organisms whose origin is the humans in the house, even though we've heard a lot of talk about the importance of the organisms of humans in the house in their contribution to the microbiome. And some of them seem to have something to do either with dog poop or with fermentation or milk. And I think we'll learn more about that as some of the results, milk or cheese, some of the results start to come out. And I don't want to jump the gun on this, but there is, I think Erica von Mutius would say, and the Pekkanen group would say, and Chris Johnson would say that there is no magic pill available now. And that the source of the protective organisms, we don't have to think of a cyclical argument that it's the people who are creating the source of those organisms, but many of our situations in the U.S. don't provide the sources of the organisms that they're seeing. I don't know if that's helpful. There is a pill, or there's a European concoction that is being used in a trial to try to protect kids from developing asthma and allergy, kids who are at risk. But that trial, run by Fernando Martinez, is not using home microbes. It's actually using killed forms of microbes that relate to respiratory infections. And that trial is publicly available on the web.
Thank you. That's very interesting.
Hi there. Are we on? Okay. I have a follow-up comment, and because I'm not in a field that produces academic literature, unfortunately, I don't have a statistical paper that, statistically valid paper that I can point to for this, but I wanted to share some experience related to your comments about visible mold and its correlation to asthma. And that is just to share some of our experience, which is that when we are called out to go and look at mold or mildew, what's referred to as mold or mildew in a damp house, we often find that the thing that people are looking at is algae or is a combination of mold and algae. So I just offer that up as an opportunity that when people say they have mold, when people come in and have mold, unless there's an actual assessment of what's on the wall, it may be mold and, as you pointed out, with mold and bacteria, it may be a combination of many things.
Well, that's an interesting point, a good point. It just points out the inherent weaknesses in all epidemiology and all measurements. The fact that people think something looks moldy, or maybe the trained researcher thinks it looks moldy, that's the metric they've used in the study, and overall that shows these increased risks. It undoubtedly has things that are dirt or other kinds of growth that are not mold included in the signal that they're analyzing, and if they could get rid of that noise, they'd probably see a stronger signal. But on the other hand, the kinds of studies where they've measured specific kinds of mold and the quantities, those have not been as consistently helpful. So we're kind of stuck at this point till we get the right things to measure.